Father Leopold Mochigemba had a problem. Actually, he had thousands of problems, all of them living in the impoverished region of Upper Silesia, then controlled by Prussia, part of modern-day Poland. Father Leopold was a Franciscan priest, and his flock was suffering. The Prussian government was hostile to Catholics, favoring Protestant Germans. Young Polish men were being conscripted into the Prussian army, forced to fight in wars far from home. Land was scarce. Most Silesians were landless peasants working on estates owned by German nobility. When floods destroyed crops in 1853, many families faced starvation. But Father Leopold had been sent to Texas as a missionary, and what he saw there gave him a revolutionary idea. What if he could bring his entire community to Texas? What if, instead of suffering under Prussian rule, these faithful Catholic families could build their own town in the Texas wilderness, a place where they could worship freely, speak Polish, and own their own land? In 1854, Father Leopold wrote urgent letters back to Upper Silesia. His message was compelling. "Come to Texas. I will meet you. We will build a new community together, centered on our faith and our Polish heritage." For 150 Silesians, this was a lifeline they couldn't refuse. In December 1854, the German ship Weser arrived at Galveston, carrying something unusual: a group of Polish families carrying a wooden cross. Unlike the Germans, who came with the backing of noble organizations, or even the Czechs, who had at least pooled resources for their journey, the Poles arrived with almost nothing. They had sold everything, every pot, every piece of furniture, every tool, to pay for their passage. What little money remained was barely enough for food, much less supplies for starting a farm. And unlike other immigrant groups, there was no welcoming committee waiting on the Galveston docks. No Methodist immigrant home had been alerted to their arrival. No merchants offered help or supplies. Father Leopold wasn't there to meet them. He was inland, preparing a site for their settlement. The Polish immigrants must have felt absolutely lost. Here they were in a strange city where almost no one spoke Polish. The humidity was oppressive. The language, the food, the smells, everything was alien. Some of the families had small children, including infants born during the voyage. But they had faith. They had Father Leopold's instructions, and they had each other. From Galveston, the group made their way to Indianola, and then began the brutal overland journey inland. They walked. 150 people, including elderly grandparents and small children, carrying their meager possessions and that wooden cross, walking through South Texas in December. If you've never been to South Texas, you might imagine December as cold and snowy, like a Polish winter. It's not. December in South Texas can be mild, but it can also bring blue northers, sudden cold fronts where the temperature drops 40 degrees in an hour. The landscape is harsh: thorny mesquite trees, rattlesnakes, scorpions, and vast stretches of nothing. The Polish families trudged on, following rough trails and occasional wagon roads, heading for Karnes County, where Father Leopold had scouted land. They had no wagons. They couldn't afford them. They carried children who got tired. They helped elderly family members who struggled with the pace. On December 24th, 1854, Christmas Eve, they reached a small, unremarkable spot along the San Antonio River. There was a spring, some trees for shelter, and not much else. Under a massive live oak tree, with the stars of Texas above them and months of hardship behind them, Father Leopold conducted midnight mass. The families knelt in the dirt. They sang hymns in Polish. They prayed in thanks for their safe arrival and in hope for their future. They named their new home Panna Maria, Virgin Mary. It was the first permanent Polish settlement in the United States. The romantic image of that Christmas Eve Mass quickly gave way to the harsh reality of Texas frontier life. The Poles had come from Silesia, where the landscape was mountainous, forested, and cool. Texas was flat, hot, and filled with things that could kill you. Rattlesnakes were everywhere, in the grass, under rocks, sometimes even hanging from trees. Coral snakes, copperheads, water moccasins, the variety of venomous snakes was terrifying to people who'd never encountered such creatures. Then there were the insects. Mosquitoes swarmed in clouds, carrying malaria. Fire ants created painful welts. Scorpions hid in shoes and bedding. Tarantulas, though mostly harmless, were huge and frightening. The heat was overwhelming. In Silesia, summer temperatures might reach 75 or 80 degrees. In Texas, it could hit 105 degrees, and the humidity made it feel even hotter. People working in the fields sometimes collapsed from heat exhaustion. Add to this the constant threat of Comanche raids — this was still the frontier in 1854 — the difficulty of farming unfamiliar soil with inadequate tools, and the isolation from any other settlement, and you can understand why some of the settlers supposedly wanted to hang Father Leopold for bringing them to this hellish place. But like the Czechs before them, the Poles were survivors. What the Poles lacked in resources, they made up for in community organization and sheer determination. The very first structure they built, before proper houses, before a school, before anything else, was a church. Actually, it was more like a brush arbor, a simple shelter with a roof and walls made of branches. But it was their church, where they could worship in Polish without fear. Within a few years, they'd built a proper wooden church, and eventually, a beautiful stone church that still stands today. The church wasn't just for Sunday Mass. It was the center of community life, where weddings happened, where disputes were settled, where news was shared. Like the Czechs, the Poles were fierce about maintaining their language. They established schools where children learned in Polish and English. They sang Polish songs, told Polish folktales, and maintained Polish customs. Interestingly, the Polish spoken in Panna Maria evolved into a unique dialect linguists call Texas Silesian Polish. It preserved some older forms of Polish that had changed in Poland itself, while also incorporating Spanish and English words. By the late 20th century, it was one of the oldest preserved dialects of Polish outside of Poland. The Poles created their own mutual aid societies, similar to the Czech SPJST. If your barn burned down, the community rebuilt it. If you got sick and couldn't work your fields, neighbors harvested your crops. This wasn't charity, it was survival. Everyone knew that someday they might be the one who needed help. As the first generation had children and those children grew up, there wasn't enough land around Panna Maria for everyone. So the Poles did what Americans have always done. They moved west, founding new settlements. Towns like Częstochowa, Kosciuszko, and Falls City were established by Panna Maria's children and grandchildren. Each maintained that Polish Catholic character: church at the center, Polish language in homes, traditional foods and celebrations. Today, Panna Maria is a tiny community, a handful of buildings, the historic church, and a museum. But its significance in Texas history is enormous. It proved that even the poorest, most desperate immigrants could succeed through faith, community, and determination. The Poles had no wealthy sponsors like the Germans' Adelsverein. They had no elaborate plans or resources. What they had was Father Leopold's vision, their Catholic faith, and an unshakable commitment to supporting each other. Polish Texans maintained their distinct identity longer than many immigrant groups. Into the 1970s, Some elderly Polish Texans still spoke their unique dialect at home. Churches continued to conduct some services in Polish. Traditional Polish foods like pierogi and kielbasa became part of the Texas culinary landscape, especially in South Texas. Polish farmers brought intensive agricultural techniques from Silesia. They were skilled at maximizing productivity from small plots of land, which was valuable in the early days when each family's survival depended on their harvest. The beautiful stone churches built by Polish communities became landmarks across South Texas. The Panna Maria Church, with its distinctive architecture, is now a pilgrimage site for Polish Americans from across the country who come to see where it all began. The Polish story reminds us that immigration to Texas wasn't one single narrative. While Germans came with organizational backing and Czechs came fleeing economic hardship, the Poles came following a spiritual leader, bound together by faith. Their Christmas Eve arrival under the live oak tree has an almost mythical quality, and perhaps that's fitting. Sometimes the stories we tell about our beginnings shape us as much as the facts themselves. For Polish Texans, that image of families kneeling in prayer under the stars, having survived an impossible journey through faith and community, became the founding myth of their presence in Texas. And every time Polish Americans visit Panna Maria, every time they trace their family tree back to those 150 pioneers from Silesia, they're connecting to that moment when desperation and faith combine to create something lasting. The wooden cross they carried? It's long gone. But the community they built around it is still there, a testament to what's possible when people refuse to give up on their dreams, even when reality seems determined to crush them. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to continue this journey through the Golden Door and find out how other groups immigrated to Texas through Galveston. Let me know in the comments what you think so far, and what other parts of history would you like to see covered. Until next time, stay curious.